There's a reason you are here on Sunday morning. There's some reason you came here today, because you are getting something out of this. And hopefully they would too, if they knew about it. It's never the goal of an elevator speech to try to convince someone that they are wrong and you are right. I promise that will not end well. Never does. Especially if you're on an airplane. Not a good strategy. But if you let them know that options exist, they can make their own choices. And so here are my tips and tricks. I have 3 of them. And in between each, I'm going to ask Mike to share anything he wants to add, and then we're going to pass the mic around if you have anything to add as well to learn from each other. So I have 3 tips. So these are sort of my big buckets of what's in my head when I think about how I'm going to talk about Unitarian Universalism. The first is UU history. The second is covenant, not creed. And the third is what we do. So those are my 3 buckets, and we're going to go through each of them separately. If you need a pen, now might be the time to get it out. Okay, so today's Father's Day. My dad is joining us on Zoom. Hi, Dad. Love you. My dad is not a Unitarian Universalist. He's a sort of a Christina-tarian. He likes to watch me preach. Right, Dad? Okay. But one time he was telling me about he was on a trip and somehow he was talking to someone and the person, I don't know how they got talking about the fact that his daughter was a minister, but they did. And the guy didn't understand, women can't be ministers. And my dad said, oh, yeah, well, she is. And then he said, so what is this Unitarian Universalist thing? And my dad was relaying this story to me after the fact. And he said, I don't know. I don't really know, how to explain it. But I said, like Unitarian was like God was one and Jesus wasn't God. And so they believed that Jesus was like a good teacher. And Universalism was like nobody goes to hell and everything's about love. And they just really focus on like, making the world a better place. But I don't know, maybe that wasn't right. And I went, holy crap, Dad. If I could get everyone in my congregation to say that, we'd be good. So he's been listening. So that's the history version of our elevator speech. Unitarian was sort of the opposite of Trinitarian. Trinity being God is 3 parts. Unitarian being God is one thing. God is God, Jesus was separate. So historical Unitarians didn't believe Jesus was God. They believed he was a moral teacher. They believed they should read the Bible using reason. They should look for those moral lessons. But they didn't attribute a lot of the sort of supernatural stuff to Jesus. The emphasis for historical Unitarians wasn't so much on salvation, this idea that Jesus died and did something to save us all. Salvation was instead because we followed Jesus' example as a moral teacher. So that was sort of Unitarianism, reason, morality, those kinds of ideas. Universalist, on the other hand, didn't have any problem with the Trinity, but they didn't believe in hell. They believed that everyone was universally saved, universal salvation, that you didn't have to do anything for it. You didn't have to earn it. And so the emphasis there was on love. God was loving. Why would God send anyone to hell? And if God is loving and if there is no hell, then we don't need to focus on that in this life. We don't need to be saving people's souls. Instead, we can work on this life, the hell that we've created for each other, and we can try to eliminate that. So now, in 1961, when these 2 traditions got together, they created Unitarian Universalism, and they said, we're no longer going to be explicitly Christian. And there's a lot of history that goes into that. You don't need to know all that. And certainly if you're telling an elevator speech, you really don't need to get into all of that. But when they got together, they said, you know what, we're not going to be explicitly Christian anymore. You can be Christian, and there are plenty of folks in our congregations that are, but you don't have to be. And we're going to focus on some of those things historically: reason, morality, love, helping each other in this life. So that's sort of where we are today. And knowing just those basic facts about our history can kind of help you as you're sharing who we are today. All right, so that's history. I don't want to muddle your brain too much with too much complex history. I could teach like a year-long UU history class because it's so cool, but it's too much. So the second bucket that I want you to sort of hold in your head is covenant, not creed. So you heard me earlier mention that we are non-creedal. When the Unitarians and Universalists got together, they decided not just that they would be not explicitly Christian, but that they would be non-creedal. There would be no creed that people were required to say to be a part of Unitarian Universalism. And a lot of traditions, especially Christian traditions, do have creedal tests, or an idea that you have to be able to say a creed. The Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, something like that. We don't have anything like that. And so instead, what we focus on is not what we believe, but what we do. And there's this quote: "We need not think alike to love alike." And it's attributed to Francis David, who was a 16th century Transylvanian Unitarian pastor who was a martyr for our faith. And I love that quote so much. We need not think alike to love alike, that I had it printed on the invitation and the order of service for my ordination. And it's not a real quote. I didn't know that at the time. It's sort of falsely attributed to Francis David. So I don't want to lie and tell you this great quote that isn't real. But it's a good one to sort of hold in your mind, because it's true. We don't need to think alike. We don't need to believe alike to love alike, to do good for the world together. So if I were to take a moment and ask every single one of you what you think about God, you would have different opinions, right? Different ideas. And that's good. That's one of the things we agree on here at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, that we don't have to agree about what's inside our minds. Instead, we agree on how we're going to act. And so we focus on relationships, actions, relationships between each other. That's what covenant is about. Covenant is a big religious word that just means promises. That we're going to collectively work together to make these promises. That there's a great UU theologian who said we are a promise-making, promise-breaking, promise-remaking people. Because we're gonna mess up. We always do, because we're human. But part of what it means to be in covenant is that we come back together and try again. And so when you're explaining what it is that we believe, one of my favorite lines, because you're going to get the question, so what do UUs believe? And you could say, churches don't have beliefs, people do. That's my line. Our whole congregation doesn't have a collective belief. The individuals inside it do. And it's not that I don't care what you believe, I do, and as your minister, I'll help you find the most useful beliefs for you. But what I don't care about is whether we all agree. What I do care about is how you're living your life. And if you're living your life in a way that is loving and kind and supportive and helpful to the world. So our 7 principles, which we love to talk about here, and the new version, which we're calling our 7 values, is a covenant. It's actually listed in the bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association as covenant. And it's an agreement. Our principles are an agreement about how we're going to live. They're not beliefs. Okay. So the third thing that I like to, the third bucket, so we've got history, covenant, not creed, and the last thing is what we do. So this is where people are sort of like, so what do you do there? And I sort of say kind of the same stuff other faith communities do. We sing, we gather, we celebrate, we eat, we drink coffee, we love coffee. We were interviewing our music director candidates recently, and I mentioned that we can bring coffee into the sanctuary, and he was like, oh, this is my place, this is great. We bring food to people when they're sick, we offer pastoral care, we do weddings, we do memorial services, we dedicate or bless babies, kind of all the normal stuff. We do community service, we try to make our world better, we do social justice work. So holding sort of all of those things in your mind, again, remembering, are you speaking to your coworker who's really into social justice? Maybe lead with that. Talk about all the ways that historically both Unitarians and Universalists focused on justice and making the world better instead of saving souls, and how that's still true today, fighting for racial justice, gender justice, LGBTQ rights. And if you're speaking to your neighbor who's grieving, focus on the fact that if they need someone to offer a memorial service, maybe nobody's willing to do a memorial service for their wife. Hey, maybe you should call the fellowship. My ministers would. Or you could talk to them about the fact that, that's what we do here, is we support each other when we're struggling. So knowing kind of all the things we do, you don't have to know every single program and committee. You won't, because there's a lot, but just kind of remembering that there's lots that we do here to support each other, and that is actually the more important thing. People right now in our society are desperate for community, just desperate. But they're like, I don't know where to go. I don't want to go to a church because they're going to have all this baggage, right? But if you could help them know that there's a place they can go, where they can find community, friendship, support, without all that baggage.